Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 12 of CIT 245. I believe actually this is, I'm just going to double check the syllabus. Yeah, so this is our last um, lecture week, last presentation I have for you guys. The next couple of weeks, I'm going to let you guys focus on finishing up your finals. I also noticed that I don't think I posted the actual requirements for the finals yet. I've tried to talk about it, so it may have been obvious that you're taking your prototype design and fleshing it out as you've been doing all semester. So apologies if that was confusing. I will make sure to post all of the requirements and rubric and everything by the end of the week. But let's get into it. So this week, one more thing. I also want to apologize for posting this so late. I had some issues in the earlier this week trying to uh, edit and export the videos, and then everything got corrupted. So I'm recording it again because I messed that up. So I apologize. This is coming in so late in the week. I apologize. I think I've already posted the discussion for this week, but if you were waiting for this to go over the discussion, just let me know if you're having trouble getting it done before Sunday, because it is only like 3 days, 4 days I've given you for that at this point. But considering this is the last week of actual lectures and stuff, the should be able to catch up on things if you've missed anything, um, or if you're having trouble this week, I should say. All right, so this week we're talking about paper design concepts in digital game design. So I kind of wanted to this week bridge. This isn't so important for your final. You're not going to be making a video game. Um, that's not the point of this course, but I wanted to bridge this into the wider uh, video game design, um, I guess, courses that we have at Bristol, and talk about how the things you're learning in the paper design course are also relevant for digital game design when you get into doing more video game related things. I also want to talk about a little bit about traditional paper games that have made the bridge to digital games, whether it's a digital client or influences on video games and video game design. Talk a little bit about examples of those, and explain kind of how they go through how the original game has been translated into digital. So um, let's talk about the core concepts of how you things that you will see kind of being bridged between paper design and digital design. Um, Rule sets and mechanics. So a lot of your um, ways. So in video games, you have your game loop, the things that you'll be doing um, over the course of playing the game. So whether it's a game like a Call of Duty, where you're playing a multiplayer match and you have your objective, and your loop is spawn in, uh, kill the other team, or capture the flag, or do whatever you're doing, gain win points, die, get shot, die, do it again, stuff like that. That's a game loop, and that is the same concept as your rule sets, your rule book, and your mechanics in a um, paper game. Player agency. So video games obviously provide a lot of player freedom within the constraints of whatever your design is, whatever the gameplay loop is. Um, it is important to give players agency in video game design just as much as it is to give it them it in traditional board game design. Um, so you'll see both. You'll see how providing and learning how to figure out ways to give player agency in board games can really help you in deciding how a player will interact with your game digitally. And progression systems. This is mostly for your RPG or RPG like mechanics in games. Any kind of progression system A lot of that kind of lends itself to Dungeons and Dragons, to RPGs, to story based, or I guess uh, overarching like narrative based board games and things, that allow players to gain more advantage over time. Same idea. You'll see that a lot in gaming and in video gaming as well. And knowing how to create a good progression system, um, for a video game that you're designing. You can learn a lot of that by playing RPGs or by creating your own RPGs or your own uh, player progression systems inside your board games. So next, we're going to talk about the kind of ways that games have been successfully transferred from paper to digital formats. And these three examples are kind of examples of the overarching categories that have been successful and in different ways. So, chess being digital in a digital form for decades. Um, One of the easiest games to have translated from paper to digital because it's so uh, as I've said before, it's a solved game. So all of the information and all of the things that you can do during the game are completely open to both players. So the only things that mechanically you have to program into a digital version would be the ways that those pieces move and capture other pieces and the game end states. So winning, losing, or drawing in a game of chess. Next up is Dungeons and Dragons, which is my example for all RPGs, but we'll get a little bit deeper into kind of the legacy that D&D has had on digital game design. Um, from very early on concepts of the RPG, whether it's Final Fantasy or the Mana series or the early Ultima or um, similar really early multiplayer RPGs. A lot of uh, pretty much all of these systems, all of the role playing systems that you see inside of these games can trace their origins back to Dungeons and Dragons and to other tabletop games. Um, and to more recent successes in like Baldur's Gate, where it is literally playing through a Dungeons and Dragons campaign digitally, um, and having fleshing that out into a more immersive experience. And the final example is I use Magic Arena. It's not actually the first to have done a digital card game client. It's definitely not. It's very unlikely it's the best either. But I don't even know what the first clients digitally were for a trading card game or a collectible game. Probably maybe Magic Online would have been the first, but there's also a possibility that Pokemon TCG Online came before that. I'm not entirely sure, but now we have a lot of very streamlined um, collectible game interfaces in digital spaces. So whether it's Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon, which are the big card games that have digital clients, or if it's some other collectible style of analog game turned into a digital game, something like a 40K or a Warhammer 40K or another miniature game that's been Blood Bowl, I think, is probably the most direct translation from a board to a digital version for a Warhammer game. Um, but these allow players to interact with a collectible game in a digital space without having to own any of the physical components for the game, um, while still experiencing the collectability. You have a lot of similar aspects in Arena or PTCGO or Master Duel, where you open your booster packs, you collect your cards, build your decks, play in tournaments, drafts, things like that, all available in these clients, which expands the reach of these games to beyond those who own physical cards or miniatures for um, the miniature ports. So let's talk about the D&D legacy. So it's a lot, a very very broad sense, the way that Dungeons and Dragons has influenced video game design, um, and a lot of different ways that the mechanics from D&D have been translated into video games uh, through the history of RPG game creation. So D&D obviously has your character progression system, your different classes, different races, different attributes for those characters, um, randomized success and fail rates. You'll see even as far back as the original Final Fantasy for the NES, you have um, what is displayed rather simply, but whether you hit or miss, how much damage you do, whether you crit on those attacks, things like that. Whether you do status effects, all are done in the background through random number generators, which are exactly the same as rolling dice for digital terms. So if you are creating a game that has these types of character progression mechanics in them, or combat mechanics or interactive mechanics like that, like you see in D&D, you can find examples of ways that those mechanics have been integrated in the past, and most of the time, those core points come from a game like Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, the storytelling, narratives, not even like restricted to just RPGs, but any narrative heavy story, any any narrative heavy um, game or video games that, especially in the fantasy and sci-fi genres, can really lend that kind of world building and design of character classification to Dungeons and Dragons in some way. Whether it's the designers play D&D to inspire them for their story, similar to how Chris Metzen created the Warcraft storyline from his D&D campaigns, or if it's just something that's like a high fantasy RPG, like a Final Fantasy, where the the world building, the magic system, and the classes and everything are all kind of the world itself is all kind of based around what you would see in Dungeons and Dragons. And the last point here is modularity, which is that Dungeons and Dragons is an infinitely customizable game system, in that you can tell any story you want to, you can create any character that you want to, you can create new thing, combine and remove certain things you don't like, create new things that don't exist in a rule book, all to fit your um, whatever campaign, whatever story you're trying to tell. Same can be said for a lot of role playing games, a lot of gaming in general nowadays. Modding and character customization, things like that, are very popular. And I think that the best examples of this are actually in the Bethesda game library through Fallout or Elder Scrolls, where a lot of the um, large, very successful, very popular mods for those games happen to add new story elements or new characters or additional ways to play the game. So let's talk about design iteration. Kind of the overarching theme of everything that we've been learning this semester is that iterating on a game design is key, whether or not it is digital or physical, whether it's a video game, or a paper game. Creating and iterating on design ideas is important in all aspect of game design. You have to figure out what works and what doesn't, whether it's fun, whether it mechanically makes sense, whether it narratively makes sense. And you have to do all of those things again in a little bit of a different form if you're making a video game as well as if you're making a paper game. Um, some of the tools, some of the things that we use when doing iteration in digital game design. Um, I've only used a paper prototype once, and that was for RPGs. But paper prototypes, whether they are actually physically paper or um, a text document or an Excel spreadsheet, things that allow you to simulate certain game mechanics or um, visually uh, kind of organize the way that a thing is going to work in your game. Um, Paper prototypes are obviously a lot more common in um, uh, paper game design because you're going to start by creating a prototype of your game and it's going to be a paper prototype. But they are used quite often in digital game design as well. Um, Again, I've only really used it once in my own game designs, but in that RPG, it was very important to create a spreadsheet that did calculations for combat math to see if the way that our equations were working for that combat, um, for the way it was calculating damage, actually made sense, or if we were getting erroneous or incredibly large numbers. Um, but you can also use paper prototypes for things like to see kind of the concept of how tall a character is compared to another element in your game. For platformers and things like that, that can be important because it can tell you kind of creating the math for you by telling you how tall a character needs to be to get over an obstacle, how tall obstacles can be, or how long obstacles can be, things like that. Next up is digital prototyping, which is the uh, next step in digital game design. You will want to create, very much like you would create a physical prototype in board game design. In digital or in video games, you would create a digital prototype, a gray box. We call them as well representation of the game's uh, worlds, maps or levels, and simple parts of the game design to test those mechanics out in an actual digital space. Um, can be very important before you start putting in, or even before putting in any art assets, but also before commissioning any art assets, and having that work done is to make sure that what you want to use that asset for actually makes sense in the space that you're creating. Um, Finally, we talked about feedback loops, talked about play testing. These are the same things that we've talked about before with play testing in paper design. We also do it in digital. If you've ever participated in an alpha or a beta for um, a video game, that's iterative design. Um, Companies, studios will take your alpha play tests, take the data from those and the feedback given from those, and iterating on game mechanics or game systems inside of um, their video game prototype, improve on it, and run another test. In digital gaming, we start as with alphas. We use those mostly to make sure that mechanics and systems work. Make sure that if it's an online game, that the online components are capable of doing what they need to. In alphas, it's often called stress test to make sure that we have um, internet compatibility with the servers and the hosts and clients for all of the online gaming. And then in future iterations, then we make sure that it can hold the correct number of people that we want to see in a game at one time, and that the gameplay is flowing correctly with that number of people. And then when you get into beta stages, beta starts mostly polishing game mechanics, the numbers, and making sure that parts of the game are fun, as well as again finding any of those hiccups and bug tests and stuff, or um, doing bug testing and stuff like that for final game release. When you get into a beta, most of the things that are in a beta are finalized, and there are very specific things that you're looking to make sure um, are able to be finalized before eventually releasing the game. Um, so let's talk about game design as a shared process. Kind of how this reflects in both paper gaming and digital gaming. Whether it's something where you're trying to, as a group, as Dungeons and Dragons, great example of this, trying to tell a story or create a world for the um, for the game that you're playing. Very similar to creating and writing video game stories. Um, whether it's something that, and I probably use misnomer here as global collaboration, but it's widespread collaboration where um, you want to play a multiplayer game on paper. You want to have a large group for it. You find a space with a large group of people who want to play that game. You play that game. Similar idea in video gaming with online multiplayer makes this a lot easier than say split screen co-op, but you find a group of people who want to play the game by joining a game with them, and then you are able to play that game with people anywhere in the world. And as this design as these design ideas are shared and propagated, in paper design, I guess paper design game jams do exist, and they are probably a little bit more widespread than I think that they are, but or that I've experienced. But if you have a paper game that, or if you have the ability to create a paper game on the spot with people, like-minded people, then that's great. Um, and can be a lot of fun. It's very similar, or the game jam idea is that you get a group of people to um, create a game from scratch to a certain point, whatever the amount of time that they allot for it, and the end result game is usually shared and played by a bunch of people who then decide whether or not they can be judged and given awards based off of how how they stack up against other submissions for a game jam. But game jams are usually really fast, really simple ways of creating a game with a bunch of people that are can be complete strangers. It can be people that you've worked with previously. It can be entire studios. Just kind of usually small, very quickly made games, just to propagate indie video gaming, which is great. Um, Advantages of digital over paper. Obviously, there's a lot more powerful things that you can do in digital. You can pretty much do anything, and doing certain things in paper can be very difficult. Um, Anything requiring automation. This blurs the lines a little bit in with paper and digital gaming, especially with companion apps and things like that can do a lot of the automation that you have in games like Betrayal House on the Hill or Arkham Horror or anything like that. Um, Immersion. I'll give this to digital to video games because creating an immersive, hyper realistic, or even if it's a stylized thing, something that's artistically immersive is a lot easier to do, or a lot more encompassing than in digital format with graphics and audio and um, all that stuff is a lot easier, or a lot more immersive than playing a board game can be. But at the same time, if you're in a game or playing a game like a D&D campaign where the storytelling is pulling you in and doing it can be the same kind of immersion, just visually it's a lot easier, a lot more thorough in video gaming. Uh, Scale, obviously, you can't have hundreds of thousands of people playing the same board game at one time, whereas video gaming does allow you to do that. And randomization, especially with the development of AI over the or generative AI specifically over the course of the last couple of years, doing procedural generation or AI generation of game game mechanic storytelling points, 3D assets, any game assets. Uh, it can be a lot, or is much more um, much more sophisticated than rolling some dice in a D&D campaign. Though, given the context of what your game is trying to do, rolling dice can do everything that you need it to do inside of your game world. So that's fine. I'm not saying that any of these things are particularly bad for like in the case of physical or of paper gaming. It's just that you can do a lot more uh, in video gaming because of the processing power of a computer over um, physical game components. But on the other hand, you lose some things in video games that you can do very well in board games. So social interaction. Now, obviously, in multiplayer games, and I've played my fair share of MMOs, so I can say that there's a lot more social interaction than is on its face for video gaming. But being in the same location as somebody and um, getting to know them as a person as well, not just as a player in a game, is a different experience and something that physical gaming does a lot better than video gaming right now. Next, rule flexibility. So I talked about mods before, and mods are something that can be easily integrated into to do kind of anything you want in a video game. Um, it's a lot faster and faster if you're playing a board game to decide you want to change a rule or you want to add a rule or you want to remove something that you don't like in a game or makes it too hard or whatever. It's a lot more on the fly. It's a lot easier to make those adjustments um, physically than it is in a game because you have to actually program things. Um, and then visual simplicity. This is honestly, video game UIs can get very complex. Video game mechanics and customization, a lot of the role playing mechanics in games can get needlessly bloated. And that's something that is a lot easier to simplify and streamline in paper game design. Okay, so I lost my recording ended there. Um, so So let's talk kind of the blurring of the lines between physical and digital gaming. So we are living in a increasingly digital world, and technology has gotten incredibly advanced to the point where you will and can currently play paper games in digital spaces in a couple of different ways. And kind of my examples here, I'll go down the line, are very there we go are very broad examples of the space. Um, Tabletop Simulator, which is the example on the um, left, the first image, is a game that is designed to give you a digital space that you can create board game components in and play those games against other people. Um, there is an entire, very extensive library of game packs that you can import and play. This is an example of playing the Pokemon card game, but you can play any number of board games, and all it does is provide you a 3D space and the components in the form of 3D objects, and the ability to script certain gameplay mechanics inside of the game itself so that you can automate a lot of things in gameplay. But at its core, it's playing a physical game in a digital form. The next is augmented reality, AR, where this is an example of a tabletop miniature game being played in AR. And a lot of what you can see, or the way that AR works, is you have um, digital assets, 3D assets that combine with spaces, with physical spaces in the real world, and kind of like a fusion of the two. So in this example, you have a tabletop miniature game being played on top of an actual table, but all of the pieces are digital, and you interact with the game digitally, very similar to a VR experience. Um, the kind of world between AR and VR is also very blurred because uh, a lot of experiences you have in you can play in VR are use pass through on the headsets that allow you to interact with actual physical things in the world, um, and have your play spaces be uh, parts of the world around you, which goes into the next part, which is full on VR experiences, which kind of combines the idea of AR and something like a tabletop simulator where you can play physical games. They can be very automated. The example here is a game of Catan being played in VR, and Catan can be, I believe, the VR client for Catan is about as automated as it can get for Catan, but it gives you that kind of feeling of being in the same physical space as other people while not actually being there. You're in VR, very similar to how people interact in things like VR chat, where they are um, able to interact with each other in ways that you could do in physical space, but you can do it. You are actually doing it in digital space. Um, these are examples of kind of the ways that those things are the physical and digital are blending together. Um, and honestly, with the emergence of these technologies, it's very easy to see that you can turn any game that you want to design in paper can be turned into a digital representation one way or the other, whether it's in a simulation game like Tabletop Simulator, or it's a full-on digital client that creates the same game mechanics that you would see in physical play in a digital space like Magic Arena or Blood Bowl or um, Master Duel or things like that. So I believe, yep, that is the end of the slideshow. So again, this week, the only thing that I have for you guys to do is the discussion posts, and then starting next week, we have a week of final project presentation or preparation, and then I will ask for submissions for the initial draft of your final project in 2 weeks, so week 14. Um, that is kind of for me to go over and give you feedback on things that I think you should change or that I really like, things like that. And once those things are actually, or once the initial draft is submitted, then you'll have a week to um, edit the things that I think that should be edited or that your own playtesting feedback has given you, and then finalize your final, and then that final will be due on the last day of the semester. We're getting really close to the end of the semester, so I hope everybody has a. I think next week is Thanksgiving. I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving, and let me know if you guys have any problems or any questions about your final. I will be posting the final requirements and everything by the end of the week, and get those out to you guys, so you can look it over it, line everything up. Thanks, everybody. See you guys next week.